Welcome to a new episode of Diversity Matters, a Fireside chat series hosted by the PRCA's Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Committee. My name is Lee Nugent. I'm the Regional Director of Archetype in APAC and a member of the PRCA's ED&I Committee. I'm delighted to say that we have with us today Puneet Singh, who is the Director of Communications APAC, Japan and China for Cisco. Thank you for joining us, Puneet.
Thanks, Lee. Delighted to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Great. Well, leadership plays a crucial role in promoting and fostering ED&I in the workplace, and a company's leadership can set the tone for how employees interact and engage with each other. And those actions can encourage or discourage diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Evidence suggests even that behavior can impact on the performance of teams. Recent research from Deloitte, for example, noted that it's 17% more likely that teams are high performing when they're operating in a more inclusive environment, and that 20% are more likely to say that they make better high quality decisions. And also, perhaps unsurprisingly, the report suggested that it's much more likely that teams behave collaboratively when the environment is more inclusive and diverse. With this in mind, our focus of today's chat will be on the crucial role of leadership in creating and fostering inclusive workplaces, particularly in this region. And Puneet, your experience over many years in the communications industry is really diverse. You've spent, I think, more than 5 years in senior roles in-house, similar amount of time in agency, and prior to that working in sports and business journalism. So you must have seen so many kind of different kinds of environments during that period. So I'd be really interested, maybe to kick the discussion off by having a chat around what you've actually seen and how that's made you kind of think about the role of leadership in driving and changing ED&I in workplaces. So perhaps that's where we can start.
That would be a great place to start, because I've seen the good and I've seen probably the worst as well. And I think both those experiences have played a big role in kind of shaping my thinking on what it takes to foster ED&I and make it successful. Not just fostering is the first step, thinking that we need to be a diverse team. We need to have equity in the team and we need to have inclusion. It's a giant first step, but it's just the first step.
Yeah.
Making it successful is even more important. And experiences have, Lee, as you said, been really varied. I've worked at organizations where there was a lot of, including my current workplace, where there is a lot of focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion, not just of race, not just of color, not just of orientations or political allegiances. It's also around equity of ideas, equity of thought, equity of opportunity, inclusion in the way you think, not always wanting people to think like what the leader thinks, and not always wanting them to accept that what the leader is thinking is the only right way to do things. And I think that's a big, big part. And I've also worked at places where you wouldn't dare to open your mouth and say, I don't kind of agree with that idea, without thinking and having that fear of, is this the last conversation I'm having in my role? So both sides of experiences, and I think we can talk more as we go along.
Sure. And in that time and over time, as you've worked in those different environments, have you seen the impact of the senior leadership's behavior, specifically in relation to ED&I, and seen how that's rolled into the organization? Because I'm always very interested as a leader like yourself in the impact of my own actions and my own decisions, but also how that counterbalances against a wider culture sometimes that can be influenced from the bottom up as well.
Yes, I think it has to be both top down and bottom up. But in this case, you could perhaps argue that top down is likely to have a much bigger impact, because at the end of the day, if you are a leader of a team, if you're a leader of a team within an organization, or the overall organization, your attitude towards ED&I, the way you look at it, and the way you walk that talk is going to flow through and going to cascade through every other individual in the team and how they look at it. So leaders definitely have to be the champions, because without that, there's no diversity, there's no inclusion, there's no equity on the table. But to do that, there are certain key things that leaders need to kind of think of, right? As I said, the first step is I want a diverse team, and I want to provide equity and inclusion. The second step, and the more important one, is then to walk that talk by giving people the space to be who they are and what they were hired for in the first place. If you're going to hire people from diverse backgrounds, they are going to bring a very diverse and different thinking and problem-solving skills or creative skills or tackling skills to a particular issue that the team is working on. And always have to remember, as a leader, you hired them because they had that skill. The biggest mistake you can then make is hire a diverse set of individuals and then want them to all think alike.
I think that
is space to be. And
that
that stems from a place, I personally feel, of security as a leader, because to give people that space to be themselves and to express themselves so they have the equity and inclusion. You've created the diversity, then you have to give equity and inclusion. And to give them that space where they have that, you have to be so secure in your own place, wherever you are in your leadership journey, that you are vulnerable. Because sometimes what the ideas they come from the diverse team will be better than what you have presented in the first place. They will disagree. They will bring a different perspective. They will guide you along at a different way of looking at things. And if you are not vulnerable, if you are not secure enough to be that vulnerable in front of your team, then there is no inclusion. Then there is no equity. Then it's just diversity in terms of different colors of skin, different styles of faces, and different physical appearances. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree more. I think that's an incredibly important message to impart to the audience, really, which is, as you absolutely say, on the one hand, just increasing diversity might well tick boxes. It might well change the way something looks. But if we want to change the way something works, then we've got to listen and give people room. And I think all of us as leaders, probably in the early stages of our leadership development, realize that one of the best things you can do is hire people who think differently than you think, in order to challenge you and take you out of your own comfort zone. And I recall, as you were saying that, I was recalling in my past, where I'd hired somebody who'd come from quite a neurodiverse background, particularly because they had a skill that was incredibly valuable to the business that I was in at the time. And I think one of the first messages I tried to impart to the wider team was, this person is going to work differently with you. It's going to be a different experience. And if you try to turn them into being the person who works in exactly the way that you work, we will shoot the idea of all the value that they're bringing to the organization, and they will find it incredibly uncomfortable and they'll leave. And I think that's a really important message that you pass there. It's not just about changing the way something looks. It's about changing the way that we behave in order to accept those people. I couldn't agree more. And in your time and evolution through those different kind of segments of your career, have you kind of seen things evolve in the communications landscape that have been time, not just down to the culture of the organization, but also just time related? Society is changing and making kind of demands and opportunities for us to evolve our businesses and their ED&I offers.
I think it's a combination of multiple factors. I think number one, as you said correctly, Lee, the society around us is changing and changing for the better. There is a lot more focus on equal opportunity for people from across different backgrounds. people from different cultures, people from different races, men, women, more women in the workspace, and not just more women in the workspace, giving them the opportunity to take on leadership roles. I think that's a part. I think one part that often gets not the kind of attention, there are two sides to that journey of diversity. If we just look at men and women and more women in the workspace, I think the society overall has, especially in our part of the world, has moved over the last many years from a very patriarchal kind of a culture where women were seen as just homemakers and taking care of the kids, and the men folk went out and kind of did their work, and household was up to women. A lot of that has changed in the last generation or two. At least when I look around in my family and my extended social circle, people who have young kids, I don't know of a single father in my extended social circle and my family who doesn't play an equal role at home looking after the kids, from changing nappies to driving soccer father duties to taking them to tuition classes. They all do exactly the same amount of work as the mothers. Nothing can replace a mother for a child. And I think that has also played a role in freeing up some space and time for women to say, I actually have the time now to dedicate a bit more to my career because there is an equal partner available. So it's you have to kind of look at that as a big societal change that has happened. I think second, the pandemic had many bad things about it, but I think one positive, if you may look at it that way, that has come out of it is the widespread acceptance of remote and hybrid working. Nobody expects you to be in the office 5 days a week. Nobody expects you to be working from 9 to 5. The concept of work being done at a particular time and at a particular place has completely been discarded. Work is now a set of tasks you need to do as a part of the job that you've signed up for. When you do it, how you do it, most companies are giving you that independence to do. So that's playing a big role. And I think combination of those two, topped with the focus at the corporate level, that having diversity makes business sense. Because if you have, as you said, there was a research from Deloitte, if you have diverse ideas in a room, you will come up with a much better solution. If you have diverse voices in the room, you will have, in all probability, addressed most aspects of an issue you are trying to solve. If you have diverse backgrounds in a room, you will bring different perspectives and different kinds of solutions to a problem. It makes all the business sense. So there is a drive at the corporate level, at the leadership level to achieve it. The changes in the way we live at a societal level, coupled with the acceptance of work not being a place, but being a set of things you do, and you can do that anywhere at any time. I think combination of these three, and technology being an enabler of all of that,
absolutely,
is making this progress at a much faster pace than a lot of people would have thought it would.
I this is very similar experiences from my own organization, as you've just outlined there. We've always been, and certainly in my time in the business, encouraging of remote working and flexibility, finding ways, going back to your point about working women, so which obviously often then becomes working mothers. So we have, I think, been encouraging for a long time in finding routes to do that. But we did have tensions in certain parts of the region. And certain parts of the region struggled to culturally understand the concept of remote working and not having people in the office. And as you absolutely correctly pointed out, a mixture of pandemic and technology changed that. And it's really pleasing for me to stand back and look in my own organization right across the region that there's way more adoption now of flexible practices that are encouraging women to stay with us after they've had children. We always wanted that, but it's now easier for us to encourage that. And it's hugely productive for us as an organization, because on the one hand, you have perhaps the moral and societal the moral kind of direction that you should be doing this kind of stuff and having these policies and procedures. But there's actually a really hard-nosed business gain as well, which is the amount of talent, the investment, the quality of the people that in history as an industry we've let exit our industry because we haven't found those ways or tried hard enough to find those ways to encourage the flexibility to bring them back into the business. And I think that's really a really pleasing change through a terrible time, as you said.
And I'll just add one thing to that, Lee, is I think the acceptance hasn't just been on the fact that hybrid is all right. You can choose to work where and when you decide to do your set of tasks assigned to you. I think there's a much bigger impact at the very senior leadership level of understanding and delivering a message across people managers.
Yeah.
And when people are working from home, they've taken their work home. Their home hasn't left. So I'll give you an example. Right at the peak of the pandemic, we were doing, I think if my memory serves me right, we were doing fortnightly check-ins where our CEO, Chuck Robbins, and many members of his executive leadership team, and then including doctors and psychologists and lots of people from different facets of life would come on, and we'd have an hour of just non-business related talk. How are people doing? It was all people focused. And I will never forget this. And Chuck, in one of those calls, his granddaughter walked in and she sat down on his lap and he kind of told everyone, it was a call for all people leaders, that this is the reality of every home. And he said, some of us are fortunate that we live in countries where there are bigger homes, so you have a lot of space for kids. But don't forget, some of us have colleagues who live in countries where they are living in a 2-bedroom apartment. There is no workspace dedicated. It's a home for everyone, and they're trying to make things work. So if kids comes into a call, if someone just needs to take time to look after their family because they're at home, just let them be. Work will happen, And it just set a tone, especially for me. My study door is now never closed. We had another EVP who was in the middle of a press and analyst briefing, and his daughter walked in. And he spoke to her for a good 15 seconds, and he said to all the friends in the media and analysts here, I would say sorry, but no. I just want to let you know that I have a rule with my daughter that she is the most important person in my life, and she can walk into any meeting. There is nothing more important than her. And she just walks in when she needs to talk to me. And I stop what I'm doing. And he was talking to 25 press and analysts. He stopped that for 30 seconds. And people were just the comments that came up on the WebEx chat were amazing. People were like, wow, this is how every leader should live.
Yeah.
I think there's a big demonstration of walking the talk, that we accept that you're going to be home and you're going to be working differently, not just from a different location, you're also going to be working in a different style. And that's made this equity and inclusion a lot more easier.
I think that's also a perfect example of the thing we touched on earlier on, which is the kind of culture coming from the top. Once you see that from a senior person in the organization, then I think the freedom that must give to everybody else to accept that that's to understand it's an acceptable way to behave is huge. And I think again, even in my own experiences, that I think I know more about everybody's pets on my international leadership team than I ever would. I've seen more cats, dogs, hamsters, gerbils, everything than I think I'd have ever seen in the past. But you know what? I think I know my colleagues who are in other countries and I don't spend much time with them physically. I think I know them better because of that. I know I get to understand them, see what's important to them, and see them as human beings and not just as colleagues. And I think that's incredibly, incredibly important. And I think when we're talking about equity and opportunity, I think again, there are, particularly in this region versus my prior experience in Europe, there are many more people here who live with elderly relatives in this region than perhaps do in certainly in the bigger cities in Europe. And I think the way that we've adapted our ability to work is enabling them to continue as professionals while taking on caring responsibilities with families and grandparents and things like that. And I think that's a really important message that we can give our employees too, that there is room and time for them to have their lives and the most important things in their lives. And the most important thing isn't work; it's their family and their friends and the people that they love. And I think we have lost people in the past who've said, I can't have a job and look after my grandparents. I can't do the same things. Or I want to live in a city that's 2 hours away from where our office is. I can't make that work. And I think today we can and we do. So there's lots of good things changing. How about what happens to organizations that aren't seeing the importance of making their workplace more equitable and inclusive? Do you think that's still happening out there? And what happens to those organizations in time, do you think?
I hope it is not, for the betterment of everyone. But look, it's tough to comment on other organizations without working there. But I think for those that don't do it, the risks are very very obvious, right? You number one, you just start to live in a bubble of similar ideas, of homogeneous thinking. Everyone thinks the same all the time. And you and I, we're lucky to work in an industry where you have to have a diversity of ideas. Otherwise, we will never succeed in our jobs.
Yeah.
If you had the same idea in your role for every single client that you have, clients would find out the next day.
Absolutely
like,
right.
How come it's the same story about 5 other tech companies that you represent? If I had the same idea week in, week out, I would not be in my role beyond 2 quarters. It'll be gone.
Yeah.
So if you do not encourage diversity and if you do not take inclusion and equity, I think the risks are number one, just on the diversity level. You have this homogeneous thinking, everyone thinks alike. Everyone's telling everyone all the time that we have the best ideas and the best outcomes, while the rest of the world is shooting away and putting a life, miles between them and you in terms of what they are doing and what you're doing as a team. Unless you're a team of absolute superstars and you don't want to hire anyone. Highly unlikely. The second is if you just give a tick box exercise approach. If you take a tick box exercise approach to diversity, you hire people, but you're not serious about equity and inclusion, then you have an even bigger problem, because people will come, people will join, your organization will spend time, money, and effort onboarding them, bringing them along, whether you are an agency, on different clients and introducing them to different client teams. If you're in-house, introducing your new team members to different stakeholders internally. And then these people realize they don't have a place because they don't belong, because they don't have a voice. And the reality today is that there are so many options out there for people to do different things. They will find something else to do and they move on. And then if you're in-house leader, you have to explain to your stakeholders why is there such a big churn in your team. And if you're an agency, your clients are constantly upset because every client is okay with people changing because people move on to new things. No client is ever going to be happy if the account team that's managing their work is changing every other month. No one. I don't want that in my agencies. Yeah. I'm sure none of them want that.
Yeah.
And my stakeholders wouldn't want people in different countries across Asia to be changing constantly. I'd be getting a call from the head of business saying, you need to get your team in order because stakeholders are complaining. No one stays. What's wrong?
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely true. I think that as you say, on the one hand, we're lucky, very fortunate to operate in an environment where it's pretty obvious that diversity of thought makes us better because we're talking to very diverse audiences. So the people that work with us should kind of be representative at the very least of those audiences. But also, as you touch on there, relating to churn, there is certainly, I experienced this on the agency side. I'm probably sure you will on the in-house side as well. There's a real paucity of talent that is choosing to come to comms as a first choice career at the moment. And we shoot ourselves in the foot by not opening that talent pool wider and actually hunting in places that we've not hunted before to find people who can be brilliant. And I have a personal bugbear for me, which is that I still, and I think we still do it sometimes, there's a job ad goes out that will say somebody needs to have a university degree to do what we do. And I honestly don't think you have to have a university degree to do what we do. If you can be smart enough, your written and spoken communications is strong enough, and you've got brilliant ideas, you don't have to have had the same formal education that everybody else has done. And I've worked with many professionals over the years who don't have higher education, who are brilliant communicators.
You're speaking to one. Yeah. I won't say what I do, but I don't have it.
Yeah, well, there you go. And it's like a real, and I'm working really quite hard to try and make sure we as an organization don't have that line on every job ad. And similarly as well, I think we're starting to experiment with blind recruitment as well, just to kind of see what that does in terms of particularly the most junior levels, people joining our business from the beginning, so we can try and open the talent pool, making sure there's no unconscious bias in taking place and all those kinds of things. Because one, it's the right thing to do, but two, I want to open the talent pool because it's hard to find really good people.
So we've at Cisco, just want to share a small anecdote. We've taken it even one step further. You are now actually not allowed to be on an interview panel if you haven't gone through an interviewer training.
Yeah.
And that includes training on diversity and biases and everything else. And for every hiring manager who is hiring someone, so let's say if I was to hire someone in my team tomorrow, I have to have a really diverse interview panel of interviewers.
Yeah.
I cannot have 2, 3, men of my age in the team interview people and 3 of us decide who we want to hire.
Yeah.
Got to be completely diverse panel. So
that's really, really good to hear. And I think that's where, organizations like Cisco, big global organizations, I guess, are probably ahead of smaller organizations in many ways on the journey. But that's a really easy thing to adopt, right? That's not something that's difficult for an organization of whatever size to say, right, we're going to make a commitment to do exactly what you're describing. And I think that would kind of lead me to another area that we can explore, I guess, which is sustainable ED&I initiatives that can be implemented and can start to make a difference. Interview process is one we've just talked about, blind CVs, opening the talent pool. I just wonder if there are things that you see either Cisco or elsewhere where there are simple commitments that organizations can make, that leaders can make within the organizations that can make a difference.
I think there are the tangible and intangible ones, like with everything, right? A few of the intangible ones we've already discussed. I think there should be a commitment towards training the leaders on equity and inclusion. I think diversity almost everybody gets now. Yeah. That you need to have diversity of various things in your team, but how to make that diverse? I know I keep repeating that line. But how to make that diverse set of people included and provide them equity on every single aspect. So that's number one. I think number two is around, equity around opportunity. So hiring people of diverse backgrounds, but then giving them equal amount of opportunity to grow, irrespective of what background, what educational qualification, what ethnicity, what et cetera, they come back from. I think there's a lot of conversation now ongoing around equity of pay. Making sure people on similar. I know it's difficult to achieve because even people on similar roles come with very different skill sets, come with very different backgrounds, similar level of experience. But I think till whatever extent possible, people should be paid the same amount of money for if they are doing the same job at the same company, because nothing makes someone feel less worthy than understanding they put in the same amount of work, drive the same amount of results, and are doing exactly the same role, but are getting paid less. And I can tell you, it can be incredibly demotivating, even if it starts off as a rumor. I mean, I will not name names. There was an organization I worked at where anyone you spoke to would tell you, "Oh, our pay is kind of decided based on your skin color.
Wow.
If you're from South Asia, you get paid X. If you are from Southeast Asia, you get paid X plus 10. And if you're from Europe or America, you get paid 3X."
Yeah. And so is there...
I personally don't think, Lee, that was true, because I've never seen evidence of it. But I can tell you, it was incredibly demotivating for majority of the people, because it kind of became the unverified truth that everybody thought that the guy or the girl sitting next to them who looked different was getting paid more because just they looked different.
So some organizations are increasingly transparent, particularly in Europe, where there's regulations around transparency of salaries, particularly on gender at the moment, at least. Do you think that's something that's an important step forward then in ensuring equity, but also dealing with some of the things you just mentioned, which is kind of an assumption or a rumor or whatever? Should organizations be moving to that point where they say, look, here is our gender pay gap, here is our ethnicity pay gap, this is the work that we're doing to change that if there is a gap?
I mean, I'm not a compensation expert by any stretch of imagination. I don't know what it would look like if an organization came out tomorrow and said, our ethnicity pay gap is X and our gender pay gap is Y. I am assuming you'd be expected it to address next day.
Yeah,
you can't say we are figuring out a way to, because there's no figuring out. If Lee is getting paid $100,000 a year, and Puneet is getting paid $50,000 a year because Puneet looks different to Lee, or it's vice versa, let's say.
Yeah.
Lee doesn't want to wait, or Puneet doesn't want to wait. What's there to figure out? We do the same job. You got to pay me the same money.
Yeah, I think when it comes down to individuals, you're absolutely right. I think it's been really interesting to observe some of those big organizations, particularly in Europe and the States, who are now reporting, and that includes some global PR firms who are now reporting on specifically gender pay gaps, and showing the path of change over time. I think it's really mixed results that we're seeing in terms of who's making progress and not making progress. But I guess the starting point is if there's an issue inside the organization, it's recognizing there's an issue inside the organization. But it's not, as you say, it's not an easy one. It shouldn't be there in the first place. But if it is there, then certainly the management should know that there's a problem.
I think it's more for compensation experts to kind of tackle. Yeah. I would assume in a very oversimplified manner, as you said, the first step would be recognizing that we have an issue. And second step would be, what's the lowest hanging fruit that you can solve? And that's people you're hiring new. Yeah. People who are not inside your company. So if whoever hires who's being hired new has to be at exactly the same equitable pay. And then the third step is figuring out, okay, the disparity that exists in people who have been at the company for a while, what does it take financially to address that? Yeah. How do we do that and how long? Again, not my area of expertise, but that's what I would think would make logical sense.
Absolutely. I think probably we as communications pros probably can do our bit to influence, but you're right, the experts, they need to kind of come up with the procedures about how we go about that. But I think it's an interesting starting point. Similarly, I think maybe we can just head towards the last couple of questions that are worth exploring. But I think similarly, knowing the situation inside our own organizations in terms of how are we doing as an organization that wants to promote equity. So asking our staff, trying to get measures and processes by which we can see improvement over time, I think they're important for us to do as well. And I'm sure you at Cisco do something in terms of looking at staff opinions and so on. But even kind of a medium-sized business like ours, we're very keen to survey our staff. We do it once a month on their views on things like pay equity, on what they think about the organization's attitude to diversity, whether we're doing enough, and those kinds of things. And it gives us a progress measure to go on over time. We don't get everything right by any means, but it's really important that we kind of survey and listen. And I think that's probably something else that organizations starting out on this journey might want to think about, is standing back and just taking a look at what's happening right now.
I think getting that feedback in and listening to it is very, very important. So at Cisco, we do various different things as well, just like yourself. Every people leader, I think if you lead a team of more than 3 people, you have to do an engagement pulse once every quarter. It's a standard set of questions plus open questions. And then you can kind of compare and contrast how your team is thinking about themselves, thinking about the team, thinking about the company at different levels. And then there's a lot of work that gets done on ED&I on an ongoing basis.
Absolutely. So last couple of things to wrap up. Traditionally, and in these kind of fireside chats, we have 2 questions that we ask everybody who gives up some of their time to be a guest, and thank you for doing so. And the first of those is, we are, as a team, working to develop a charter for the communications industry across APAC, specifically looking at ED&I. And we like to ask our guests, what one thing, if they could make one thing absolutely appear in this charter, what would that one thing be?
I would say equity of pay.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And then I guess, as we talked about, an analysis of where we sit today, so we can see what happens. And then lastly, from the discussion we've had now, or from whatever your experiences and experiences over time in the industry, is there one thing that you would want to leave with the people listening to this fireside chat, leave behind from this conversation, that you would say, I really would like you to take this away and remember it?
I would say I'd go back to the same thing, Lee, actually, that look, diversity is just the first step, and I think it's been talked about so much that it's kind of gotten ingrained into everything we do. I think if it's just for the comms professionals and the leaders in our sector, I would say diversity in every single aspect is absolutely foundational to the success of what we do. Thinking, background, you can pick any one of them. It's critical to what we do. If we really want to succeed as leaders, we have to be comfortable in being uncomfortable in front of diverse ideas and diverse people, because that's what will make those feel included. That's what will give them equity in your team. And those are the people who will go out and be your biggest champions, because every time someone asks them about you or your organization, they will either have one of the 2 responses: go work for them, or go work for him or her, or don't work for him or her.
Yeah.
And that will be completely driven by how included you made them feel, and how equitable were you in enabling an opportunity for them to grow within the team. There are managers I've worked with who know I would go and work with them anywhere in the world without asking what role, what money, what designation. There are 2 people in my life who both of them know. They just have to pick the phone and call me, and I will go work for them without asking anything. Yeah. There are also people who could come tomorrow and put $1 million sign-on bonus on my table, and I would still say no. I don't make a lot of money. None of us communicators do. Yeah. We lead a decent life, but we don't make millions. I would genuinely not go even for $1 million bonus to work for that person.
Yeah, absolutely. Always hire your boss. Someone once told me, not the company, hire your boss, the person that you want to work for. I think that's so true. And I think you've left us with the perfect soundbite as well, which was, it's important that we are comfortable with conversations that make us uncomfortable from diverse points of view. And I think that is a wonderful message to leave behind. So I just want to say thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us and for sharing your time with us. It's been a wonderful chat. And to everyone who's listening into the conversation, to our audience, we definitely want to hear from you. Please share your thoughts. If any of what we've discussed today has piqued your interest, has annoyed you, has excited you, anything, we'd be more than happy to hear from you via email, direct message, social media, comment underneath the broadcast or anything. So it's really important that we listen to you as the audience and help us shape these conversations as we go forward. And we look forward to you attending the next fireside chat too. But once again, to Puneet, I want to say thank you very much for sharing your time, your insights, your advice, your experience, and a wonderful payoff soundbite.
Thank you, Lee. I'll just say one thing. If something annoyed you, remember, it's a diverse idea.
That's exactly right. Perfect. And if something annoyed you, it was Puneet that said it, not me. That's the other thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Lee.
I appreciate it.